The day I lost my son. The last thing my son ever said to me before slamming the front door was something no father should ever hear. "You'll never see your granddaughter again." His words echoed through the silent hallway long after he had driven away. I stood there alone, staring at the family photograph hanging on the wall, a picture taken only 2 years earlier. My son, Daniel, was smiling. His wife, Emily, held little Sophie in her arms, barely 6 months old. I stood beside them with tears of joy in my eyes. Now that family no longer existed. At least not for me. I slowly removed the photograph from the wall and placed it inside a drawer. Not because I stopped loving them, but because looking at it hurt too much. The argument hadn't even started over money. It started over pride. For years, I had tried to help Daniel build his construction business. I invested my retirement savings, spent weekends working beside him, and even mortgaged my own house to keep the company alive during difficult times. But success changes some people. As the business grew, Daniel began listening more to wealthy friends than to the father who had sacrificed everything. "They say your old-fashioned ideas are holding the company back," he once told me. I smiled. Maybe they're right. Every generation builds differently. But inside, something broke. Months later, Emily suggested they move into a larger home across town. "It's closer to better schools," she explained. I knew the real reason. They wanted distance. At first, they stopped inviting me to Sunday dinners. Then birthday parties. Then holiday celebrations. Every excuse sounded polite. "We're busy. We already made plans. We'll visit next week." Next week never came. The hardest part wasn't losing my son. It was losing Sophie. Every Friday afternoon she used to run into my arms shouting, "Grandpa." She loved feeding the birds in my backyard. She loved the old swing I had built with my own hands. She loved hearing stories about her grandmother, who had passed away before Sophie was born. Then, silence. One afternoon I drove to their new house carrying a small birthday present. A wooden music box, handmade. Inside the lid I had carved the words, "For Sophie. Love always, Grandpa." Before I could ring the bell, Daniel opened the door. His face showed no happiness. Only anger. "What are you doing here?" "I just wanted to give Sophie her birthday gift." "We already told you not to come." "I won't stay long." Emily appeared behind him holding Sophie. The little girl stretched out her tiny arms toward me. "Grandpa." Before she could reach me, Daniel stepped backward. "No." Sophie's smile disappeared. She looked confused. "Grandpa, come." Daniel shut the door. The click of that lock sounded louder than thunder. I stood on the porch for nearly 10 minutes. Finally I placed the gift beside the flower pot and walked away. Later that evening I received a text. "Take your gift back. We don't want anything from you." I drove back after dark. The music box was sitting outside in the rain. I picked it up carefully. The carving had begun to swell from the water. I cried for the first time since my wife's funeral. Weeks turned into months. I stopped calling, stopped texting, stopped hoping. Sometimes the strongest thing a parent can do is let go. Life became quiet. Every morning I worked in my small garden. Every afternoon I volunteered at the local community center repairing broken furniture. Children there reminded me of Sophie. One little girl even asked, "Are you somebody's grandpa?" I smiled. "I hope I still am." She hugged me without asking another question. That hug carried me through many lonely nights. Christmas came. No invitation. New Year's Day. Nothing. Sophie's birthday. Silence. I accepted that my son had made his choice. I would respect it, because love cannot be forced. 6 months later, something unexpected happened. A lawyer contacted me. "Mr. Harrison, I have documents your late wife wanted you to receive only if certain family circumstances occurred." I frowned. "My wife passed away 3 years ago." "Yes. What circumstances?" "I'm afraid I can't discuss them over the phone." Curious, I visited his office. He handed me a sealed envelope. On the front, written in my wife's handwriting, were 6 heartbreaking words. "If Daniel ever leaves you behind." My hands trembled. Inside was a letter, and another envelope marked, "Do not open unless your family needs saving." I stared at it for several minutes. Then I locked it inside my home safe. Whatever was inside, I prayed I would never need it. I had no idea that only a few months later, there would be a frantic knock at my front door in the middle of the night. And when I opened it, my son, the same man who had sworn I would never see my granddaughter again, would be on his knees, tears streaming down his face, begging me to save the family that had turned its back on me. The knock came just after 2 o'clock in the morning. It wasn't the kind of polite knock a neighbor gives. It was frantic, desperate, the kind of knock that tells you someone's world is falling apart. I woke instantly. Living alone had made me a light sleeper. Grabbing my glasses, I walked slowly to the front door. The knocking continued. Please, Dad, please open the door. My heart stopped. Daniel. For a moment, I simply stood there. The same son who had forbidden me from seeing my granddaughter was now calling me, Dad, with a voice full of fear. I unlocked the door. The man standing before me barely resembled the confident businessman I remembered. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His hair was soaked from the rain. His eyes were red from crying. Then, before I could say a single word, he dropped to his knees. I'm sorry. The words were barely audible. I'm so sorry. I stared at him in disbelief. 6 months of silence, 6 months of loneliness, 6 months without Sophie, and now this. Stand up, I said quietly. No, his voice cracked. I don't deserve to stand. Rainwater dripped from his face onto my porch. I need your help. I took a deep breath. What happened? Daniel looked down at the ground. We've lost everything. He explained that 3 months earlier, his company had accepted a massive contract from a powerful investor named Victor Reynolds. Victor promised quick profits, international expansion, and financial security. Daniel signed every document without reading the fine print. I thought I was making the best decision for my family. Instead, Victor had quietly taken control of the business. Within weeks, company accounts were frozen. Suppliers demanded payment. Employees resigned. Banks called in loans. Then came the lawsuits. Daniel had personally guaranteed several debts. Now creditors weren't just coming after the company. They were coming after his home. His savings. Everything. They're taking the house next week. I remained silent. There has to be something else, I said. Daniel hesitated. There is. He swallowed hard. Sophie. My heart tightened. What's wrong with Sophie? She's sick. Those 3 words hit harder than anything else he'd said. Emily had hidden it from everyone. Sophie had developed a rare immune disorder. Treatment was possible, but incredibly expensive. Insurance refused to cover the newest therapy. Daniel's voice broke. We've already sold Emily's jewelry. Our cars. My watch. Everything. He covered his face with both hands. I don't know what else to do. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question that had haunted me for months. Why now? Daniel looked directly into my eyes. Because I finally realized something. He paused. The people I pushed away were the only ones who ever truly loved me. I felt tears filling my own eyes. Not because he was suffering. Because he finally understood. I invited him inside. The house felt strangely familiar with him sitting at the old kitchen table. For years, we'd shared coffee there every Saturday morning. Now we sat in silence. Finally, I opened the cupboard and placed 2 mugs on the table. I never stopped keeping your favorite coffee. Daniel lowered his head. I'm ashamed. I know. I believed people who said you were holding me back. I know. I thought money mattered more than family. I know. He looked surprised. You knew. I nodded. I've lived long enough to know that pride usually teaches lessons the hard way. For the first time in years, we cried together. An hour later, Daniel quietly asked, Can you ever forgive me? I looked toward the framed photograph of my late wife. She had always believed forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was strength. I forgave you the day you walked away. Daniel burst into tears. I just didn't know if you'd ever come back. Just then, my eyes drifted toward the hallway. Toward the small safe where my wife's unopened envelope still rested. Do not open unless your family needs saving. Slowly, I stood up. Daniel looked confused. Dad, without answering, I walked to the safe. My hands trembled as I entered the combination. The metal door clicked open. Inside lay the sealed envelope my wife had left years ago. Tonight, for the first time, I broke the seal. As I unfolded the letter, a small key slipped onto the floor. Attached to it was a handwritten note in my wife's beautiful handwriting. If you're reading this, our family needs hope. This key opens the safety deposit box at First National Bank. Inside is the truth I kept hidden for years. Trust your heart before you trust anyone else. I looked at Daniel. Neither of us had any idea that what waited inside that safety deposit box would uncover a decades-old secret, expose the man who had destroyed Daniel's life, and give our family one final chance to become whole again. The bank opened at 9 the next morning. Neither Daniel nor I spoke much during the drive. The envelope rested on the dashboard, and the small brass key seemed heavier than any piece of metal should. When we arrived, The bank manager recognized me immediately. "Mr. Harrison," she said gently. "We've been expecting you someday." I frowned. "Expecting me?" She nodded. "Your wife gave very specific instructions. This safety deposit box could only be opened by you, and only after presenting that key." A few minutes later, we were escorted into a quiet vault. The manager unlocked the first lock. I inserted the second key. With a soft click, the box opened. Inside were 3 items: a thick leather folder, a small velvet pouch, and a handwritten letter addressed to me. I unfolded the letter first. "My dear Michael, if you're reading this, then our family has been broken by pride or pain. I prayed this day would never come. There are things I never told you because I hoped they would never matter. But if Daniel truly needs help, you deserve to know everything. I love you, always, Sarah." By the time I reached the bottom of the page, my eyes were filled with tears. Daniel quietly asked, "What else is in there?" I opened the velvet pouch. Inside was a diamond ring. Not Sarah's wedding ring, another one. Attached to it was a faded note. "To my daughter, on her wedding day." I looked at Daniel. "This isn't your mother's handwriting." He stared back at me. "Then whose is it?" Before I could answer, I opened the leather folder. Inside were property deeds, investment certificates, old photographs, and one legal document that made both of us freeze. The document showed that more than 30 years earlier, Sarah had inherited several hundred acres of land from her grandmother. She had never sold it. Instead, she placed it into a family trust. Current estimated value, nearly 180 crore rupees. Daniel's hands began shaking. "Dad, I never knew." "Neither had I." Sarah had hidden the inheritance because she feared wealth would destroy our family. She often said, "Money should protect people, not change them." Now I finally understood. The trust hadn't belonged to me. It hadn't belonged to her. It belonged to our family. But there was one condition. The trustee could release the funds only if the money was used to preserve the family, not to reward greed. As we continued reading, another document caught my attention. It listed the trustee's name. I felt my stomach drop. Daniel leaned closer. "What is it?" I whispered the name. "Victor Reynolds." Daniel's face turned white. "The same Victor." I nodded slowly. The very man who had convinced Daniel to sign away his company. The same man who was now forcing my son into bankruptcy. Had secretly been managing Sarah's family trust for years. Something wasn't right. I flipped through more papers. Then I found a page missing from the file. Torn cleanly out. Whoever had removed it knew exactly what they were looking for. Daniel whispered, "Do you think he knew about this inheritance?" Before I could answer, the bank manager returned. "Excuse me, Mr. Harrison." "Yes, there's a gentleman outside asking for you." "Who is it?" She hesitated. "He says his name is Victor Reynolds." Daniel stood up so quickly that his chair fell backward. "What?" The manager looked nervous. "He insists it's urgent." I exchanged a glance with Daniel. Victor couldn't possibly have known we were here. Could he? I carefully closed the folder, placed everything back into the box except the letter, and locked it again. Then we walked toward the lobby. Standing near the entrance, dressed in an expensive navy suit, was Victor Reynolds. He smiled, but it wasn't the smile of a friend. It was the smile of a man who believed he was always one step ahead. "Mr. Harrison," he said calmly. "I've been looking for you." Daniel stepped forward. "You've done enough." Victor ignored him. His eyes remained fixed on me. "I think we need to discuss your late wife's trust." Every muscle in my body tensed. He knew. He had known all along. And judging by the confidence on his face, he wasn't there to help us. He was there to make sure we never uncovered the truth hidden in the missing page. Victor Reynolds smiled as if we were old friends meeting for lunch. "Mr. Harrison," he said smoothly, extending his hand. "I'm sorry for everything your family has been through." I didn't shake his hand. "I think you've caused enough of it." For the first time, his smile faded. Daniel stepped beside me. "You tricked me into signing those contracts." Victor sighed dramatically. "No one tricked you, Daniel. You signed every page willingly." Daniel clenched his fists. "You knew exactly what you were doing." Victor looked at him without emotion. "Business isn't about emotions, it's about decisions." I took a step forward. "Then let's talk about my wife's family trust." For a brief moment, Victor's expression changed. It was only a second, but I saw it. Fear. He recovered quickly. "I don't know what you're talking about." I reached into my coat pocket and held up the trustee documents. "Your name is right here." His eyes narrowed. "So, you've opened the box." You've known about it for years. Victor didn't answer. Instead, he leaned closer and lowered his voice. You should leave the past buried, Mr. Harrison. Why? Because some secrets destroy families. I looked him straight in the eyes. Our family was already destroyed. Victor turned to leave. Then he paused. Oh, one more thing. He looked at Daniel. The bank will begin foreclosure on your house tomorrow morning. And unless you pay the outstanding balance by noon. He smiled again. Your daughter won't have a home. With that, he walked out of the bank. Daniel started after him. I grabbed his arm. No, he can't just walk away. He wants you angry. Daniel stopped. I could see the frustration in his face. For years, I'd taught him never to make important decisions while angry. Perhaps he was finally remembering. Back home, we spread every document across my dining table. There had to be something we were missing. The trust papers referred several times to Schedule C. But Schedule C wasn't there. That was the missing page. Without it, we couldn't prove how the trust should be distributed. Daniel rubbed his forehead. What if Victor destroyed it? Before I could answer, my eyes fell on one of Sarah's old photographs. It showed her standing beside an elderly woman in front of a farmhouse. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, Grandmother Eleanor's farm. Never forget the blue room. The blue room, I whispered. Daniel looked confused. What blue room? I suddenly remembered. Sarah's grandmother's farmhouse. It had been abandoned for nearly 20 years. As children, Sarah often talked about a bedroom with bright blue wallpaper where her grandmother kept important family papers. I looked at Daniel. We're going there. By sunset, we reached the old farmhouse. Nature had slowly reclaimed the property. Tall grass covered the driveway. The wooden porch creaked beneath our feet. Inside, dust floated through broken windows. Everything smelled of old wood and forgotten memories. We searched room after room. Nothing. Finally, we climbed the narrow staircase. At the end of the hallway was one last door. The wallpaper inside was still blue. Daniel smiled for the first time in days. This must be it. The room looked empty. Just an old rocking chair. A bookshelf. A fireplace. We searched every drawer. Nothing. Daniel sighed. Maybe we're too late. I sat down in the rocking chair. As it moved, I heard a strange sound. A hollow thump beneath the floor. I stood immediately. We carefully rolled back the faded rug. One floorboard looked newer than the others. Using an old screwdriver we found nearby, Daniel lifted it. Beneath the floor was a small metal box. My heart pounded. Inside were dozens of letters. Old family photographs, a leather journal, and one folded legal document. Across the top it read, Schedule C. Daniel looked at me with wide eyes. We found it. I unfolded the paper carefully. The final paragraph made my hands shake. It clearly stated that if the acting trustee was ever found to have acted dishonestly or used the trust for personal gain, they would be removed immediately. And all authority would transfer to me. Daniel stared at the document. Dad, this changes everything. Before we could celebrate, headlights suddenly appeared outside the farmhouse. Several black SUVs pulled into the driveway. Car doors slammed. Footsteps echoed across the porch. Then someone pounded on the front door. A familiar voice shouted from outside. Mr. Harrison. It was Victor Reynolds. You have something that belongs to me. Daniel quickly folded the document. The doorknob began to turn. Someone was trying to force their way inside. And we had only seconds to decide whether to run, or finally confront the man who had spent years destroying our family. The front door shook under another heavy blow. Bang, bang, bang. Mr. Harrison, Victor shouted. Open the door. This doesn't have to end badly. Daniel looked at me with panic in his eyes. Dad, what do we do? I held the leather folder tightly. We protect the truth. The old farmhouse had a back entrance that Sarah had shown me years ago. We hurried down the narrow hallway and slipped outside just as the front door crashed open. Hidden behind a row of overgrown trees, we watched Victor and 3 men rush into the house. They're too late, Daniel whispered. Victor searched every room, growing more furious by the minute. When he realized the documents were gone, his voice echoed through the empty farmhouse. Find them. But by then, we were already driving toward town. Instead of going home, I drove straight to the office of my old friend, Margaret Collins, the attorney who had handled Sarah's estate years earlier. Margaret listened carefully as we placed the documents on her desk. She adjusted her glasses and began reading. After nearly 20 minutes of silence, she looked up. Michael, this changes everything. Daniel leaned forward. What does it mean? It means Victor Reynolds has been violating the trust agreement for years. She pointed to several signatures. These investment transfers were never authorized. Another page revealed large amounts of money moving into companies secretly owned by Victor. Margaret shook her head. This isn't just unethical, it's fraud. Daniel covered his face with his hands. So he destroyed my company to cover his own crimes. Margaret nodded. It certainly appears that way. The next morning, Margaret contacted the court and filed an emergency petition to suspend Victor as trustee. She also sent copies of the evidence to financial investigators. By afternoon, the news had already begun spreading. Victor Reynolds' offices were surrounded by reporters. Banks froze several of his accounts. His lawyers refused to answer questions. For the first time in years, Victor was losing control. That evening, Daniel and I drove to the hospital. Emily was sitting beside Sophie's bed. She looked exhausted. When she saw me standing in the doorway, tears filled her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Before I could answer, little Sophie slowly opened her eyes. She looked at me for several seconds. Then a tiny smile appeared. "Grandpa." One word, that was all it took. Months of pain disappeared in an instant. I walked over and gently held her small hand. "I've missed you more than you'll ever know." She squeezed my fingers. "I missed you too." Daniel quietly stepped out into the hallway, unable to hide his tears. Emily followed him. "I should never have let this happen," she said. Daniel shook his head. "No, it was my pride. I pushed Dad away. I almost destroyed everything." Emily rested her head against his shoulder. "We still have a chance." 3 days later, the court held an emergency hearing. The courtroom was packed. Victor entered wearing an expensive suit, pretending to look confident. But when Margaret presented the missing Schedule C, everything changed. The judge examined the original document carefully. He compared signatures. He reviewed the financial records. Then he looked directly at Victor. "Mr. Reynolds, do you deny transferring trust assets into companies under your own control?" Victor remained silent. His attorney whispered urgently beside him. Finally, Victor stood. "I invoke my right to remain silent." The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge's expression hardened. "Effective immediately, you are removed as trustee." He turned toward me. "Mr. Harrison, under the terms of the trust, authority is transferred to you." Daniel grabbed my arm. "Dad, you did it." But I simply shook my head. "No, your mother did." That evening, I returned home alone. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel empty. On the kitchen table sat the old music box I had made for Sophie. The one that had been left outside in the rain. Its wood was still slightly warped. I carefully wound the tiny key. A soft melody filled the room. Then I noticed something I had never seen before. One small panel on the bottom had come loose. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a tiny folded note, written in Sarah's handwriting. It contained just one sentence. "The greatest inheritance we can leave our family isn't wealth, it's the courage to forgive." I smiled through tears. At that very moment, my phone rang. It was Margaret. Her voice sounded unusually serious. "Michael, there's something else." "What is it?" "We've just discovered another sealed file connected to Sarah's trust." I frowned. I thought we'd found everything. So did I. She took a slow breath. "This file names one more beneficiary. It isn't you. It isn't Daniel." My heart began racing. "Then who is it?" Margaret answered quietly. "I think your entire family has been living with a secret for over 30 years." Margaret's words echoed in my mind long after the call ended. "There's another beneficiary." I barely slept that night. At sunrise, Daniel picked me up, and together we drove to Margaret's office. She looked unusually tense, a thick file resting on her desk. "I've verified these records 3 times, she said. "There was a second sealed amendment added to Sarah's grandmother's trust 28 years ago." Daniel frowned. "Why wasn't it in the safety deposit box?" "Because it was filed directly with the court under seal. No one could access it unless the original trustee was removed." She slid the document toward me. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first few lines repeated the trust terms. Then I reached the final paragraph. I froze. Daniel looked at me. "Dad, what does it say?" I could barely speak. "It says, if anything ever happened to Sarah, 25% of the trust belongs to a child named Grace." Daniel's face went pale. "Grace? We don't know anyone named Grace." Margaret nodded. "Neither did I. So I investigated." She handed us another folder. Inside was an old birth certificate. The mother's name was Sarah Harrison. The date was 34 years ago. Daniel whispered. That's before I was born. My heart pounded. I looked again. The father's name was left blank. What is this? I asked. Margaret spoke softly. Before Sarah met you, Michael, she gave birth to a baby girl. Daniel stared at the papers in disbelief. Mom had a daughter, yes, but the child was placed for adoption shortly after birth. The room fell completely silent. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sarah had carried this secret for our entire marriage. Not because she didn't trust me, but because she feared reopening the deepest wound of her life. Margaret handed me one final letter. This was filed with the amendment. The handwriting was unmistakably Sarah's. My dearest Michael, if you are reading this, then the truth can no longer stay hidden. Before I met you, I was young, frightened, and alone. I gave birth to a beautiful little girl. I loved her with all my heart, but I believed another family could give her the life I couldn't. Meeting you healed me. Raising Daniel gave me hope again. But I never stopped wondering about the daughter I lost. If fate ever allows our family to find her, welcome her with the love I was never able to give. By the time I finished reading, tears blurred every word. Daniel quietly wiped his eyes. I can't believe Mom carried this alone. Neither could I. Margaret looked at us. The adoption agency has since closed. But there are enough records to begin searching. Daniel nodded immediately. We're going to find her. For the next 2 weeks, every spare hour was spent following old records. Addresses, hospital files, court documents, most led nowhere. Then one afternoon, Margaret called. I found her. Daniel nearly dropped the phone. Where? She lives only 90 miles away. Her name was no longer Grace. After her adoption, she had been renamed Grace Bennett. She was now 34 years old, a high school teacher, widowed, and raising a 12-year-old son by herself. We agreed not to surprise her. Margaret contacted Grace first. She didn't reveal everything, only that important family information had come to light. To our amazement, Grace agreed to meet. The following Saturday, Daniel and I waited nervously in a quiet cafe. Every time the door opened, my heart skipped. Then, a woman with chestnut hair walked inside. She looked around nervously. For a brief second, it felt like Sarah had walked back into my life. She had the same gentle smile. The same eyes. Grace approached slowly. Mr. Harrison. I stood. Yes. She looked from me to Daniel. I don't really understand why I'm here. Neither of us knew how to begin. Finally, I handed her Sarah's letter. Please read this. She sat down and carefully unfolded the paper. As she read, tears rolled silently down her cheeks. When she reached the final line, she covered her mouth. My mother. She looked at me. She never forgot me. I shook my head. Not for a single day. Grace cried openly. So all these years, she loved me, more than you can imagine. For several minutes, none of us spoke. Then Daniel moved his chair closer. He smiled through tears. I guess, I'm your little brother. Grace laughed and cried at the same time. She reached across the table and hugged him tightly. For the first time in decades, a broken branch of Sarah's family had found its way home. But just as hope began to return, Margaret called again. Her voice was urgent. Michael, Victor Reynolds has disappeared, and before he vanished, he emptied several offshore accounts. She paused. We believe he's planning one final move. I looked out the cafe window. Across the street, a black SUV was parked with its engine running. And behind the wheel, was Victor Reynolds. He was watching us. Daniel followed my gaze across the street. The black SUV was still there. Victor Reynolds sat behind the wheel, wearing dark sunglasses. Even from that distance, I could feel his eyes fixed on us. Grace noticed our expressions. What's wrong? Daniel answered quietly. That's the man who destroyed our family. Grace turned toward the window. Before any of us could react, the SUV pulled away and disappeared into traffic. For a moment, we hoped he had simply driven off. We were wrong. That evening, I returned home exhausted. The day had been filled with emotions I never imagined experiencing, meeting Grace, reading Sarah's letter once more, and finally believing our family had a future. As I unlocked my front door, something felt wrong. The house was too quiet. I stepped inside. The living room had been turned upside down. Drawers were open. Books lay scattered across the floor. Picture frames had been smashed. Someone had searched every inch of the house. Daniel arrived only minutes later. Dad, he stopped in the doorway, staring at the destruction. They were looking for something. I nodded. The trust documents. Fortunately, The originals were locked safely in Margaret's office. Whoever had broken in had found nothing. Then I noticed an envelope lying on the dining table. It had only 3 words written across the front. For Michael. Inside was a single sheet of paper. This is your last warning. Return every document. Walk away, or your family will pay the price. There was no signature. None was needed. We both knew who had sent it. The next morning, Margaret called an emergency meeting with investigators. Victor Reynolds had officially become a fugitive. Financial investigators uncovered evidence that he had secretly transferred millions from the trust over the past 15 years. The police issued an arrest warrant. News channels across the state carried his photograph. But Victor had disappeared. Just as we began to believe the worst was behind us, Daniel's phone rang. He answered. Within seconds, the color drained from his face. What? He listened silently, then whispered, "We're coming." He ended the call. What happened? I asked. It's Emily. His voice shook. Sophie. They can't find her. We reached the hospital in record time. Emily was crying uncontrollably. I only looked away for 1 minute. Nurses and security guards searched every corridor, every exit, every parking lot. There was no sign of Sophie. Then Daniel's phone rang again. This time, the number was blocked. He answered on speaker. Victor's calm voice filled the room. You should have accepted my offer. Daniel shouted. Where is my daughter? Victor laughed softly. She's safe. For now. If you want to see her again, bring every original trust document. No police. No tricks. Tomorrow morning. The call ended. Emily collapsed into tears. Daniel slammed his fist into the wall. I stood completely still. Every instinct told me this wasn't just about money anymore. Victor had lost everything. Now he wanted revenge. That night, I sat alone in Sarah's old garden. I looked up at the stars. I don't know what to do, I whispered. Then my eyes fell upon the small wooden bench Sarah loved. Carved into one corner, almost hidden by age, were words she had engraved years ago. Truth always wins, if good people refuse to give up. I smiled sadly. She always seemed to know exactly what I needed. The next morning, I met Daniel before sunrise. He held the folder containing copies of the trust documents. These aren't the originals, he said. No, the originals stay with the court. He looked at me. What if he hurts Sophie? I placed my hand on his shoulder. We're bringing her home, no matter what. As we drove toward the abandoned riverside warehouse where Victor had ordered us to meet, neither of us spoke. The old building appeared through the morning fog. Its broken windows reflected the rising sun. Daniel parked the car. We stepped out. The warehouse doors slowly creaked open. Victor stood inside. Beside him, a frightened Sophie clung to a chair, unharmed but terrified. Victor smiled. You came. I took one step forward. Let my granddaughter go. Victor raised a small remote control in his hand. Not until we finish our business. Daniel stared at the device. What is that? Victor's smile grew wider. It decides whether all of us walk out of here, or none of us do. The warehouse fell silent. Victor Reynolds stood in the center of the room, holding a small remote control in one hand. Behind him, little Sophie sat tied to a wooden chair. Tears streamed down her face, but when she saw me, she whispered. Grandpa. That single word strengthened my resolve. I raised my hand slowly. Victor, this has gone far enough. He laughed bitterly. No, Michael, this started years ago. You took everything from me. I shook my head. No, your own greed did. His face twisted with anger. You think you're better than me. I built empires. You built gardens. I smiled faintly. And yet here we are. Daniel stepped forward. Please. This is between us. Let Sophie go. Victor looked at Sophie for a moment. Then back at Daniel. You know what your biggest mistake was? Daniel remained silent. You finally started becoming the son your father always hoped for. For the first time, Victor looked uncertain. He realized something. The fear he once controlled no longer ruled us. Outside, unnoticed by Victor, police officers quietly surrounded the warehouse. Margaret had ignored my instructions not to involve them. She had called investigators the moment we left. Their vehicles remained hidden behind nearby buildings. They were waiting for the right moment. Victor tossed a folder onto the floor. Sign these papers. I opened them. They transferred every remaining trust asset to one of Victor's shell companies. I calmly closed the folder. No. Victor raised the remote. I'll do it. I looked directly into his eyes. You won't. He hesitated. You've spent your entire life chasing money. You love yourself too much to destroy everything, including yourself. For several seconds, Neither of us moved. Then something unexpected happened. Sophie spoke. Her small voice echoed through the warehouse. Grandpa said, "Good people forgive." Victor slowly turned toward her. She continued through her tears. "My grandpa isn't scared of you." Those innocent words struck harder than any accusation. Victor's hand began shaking. The remote slipped slightly. At that exact moment, police officers burst through every entrance. "Police! Drop the remote!" Victor panicked. He tried to run. Daniel lunged forward, knocking the remote from his hand. An officer tackled Victor to the ground before he reached it. Within seconds, it was over. I rushed to Sophie. Untying the ropes with trembling hands, I pulled her into my arms. She hugged me tightly. "I knew you'd come. I couldn't stop crying. I'll always come for you." Daniel embraced both of us. Emily arrived moments later with the officers. The four of us stood together for a long time, grateful that the nightmare had ended. Several months later, Victor Reynolds was convicted of fraud, embezzlement, kidnapping, and multiple financial crimes. His illegal assets were seized. The stolen trust funds were recovered. Daniel's company wasn't simply restored. With careful planning and honest leadership, he rebuilt it from the ground up. This time, every major decision began with one question. What would Dad think? Grace became a regular part of our lives. She and her son visited every Sunday. Watching Daniel and Grace laugh together often brought tears to my eyes. Sarah had dreamed of this reunion. Although she wasn't there to witness it, her love had made it possible. One warm spring afternoon, our entire family gathered in my backyard. The old swing still hung beneath the oak tree. Sophie ran across the grass holding the repaired music box. "Grandpa, can you tell us one of Grandma's stories?" I smiled. Everyone gathered around. Daniel, Emily, Grace, her son, and little Sophie sitting on my lap. I looked toward the sky. "Your grandmother believed something very important." Sophie tilted her head. "What was it?" I smiled. "She believed that families aren't held together by money. They're held together by forgiveness." Sophie thought about it carefully. Then she wrapped her little arms around my neck. I'll never forget. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone on the porch. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and orange. On the table beside me rested Sarah's final letter. I read the last line one more time. "The greatest inheritance we can leave our family isn't wealth, it's the courage to forgive." I folded the letter gently. For years, I believed I'd lost my family forever. Instead, I had gained a son who finally understood the meaning of humility. A granddaughter who reminded us what unconditional love looks like. A daughter I never knew I had. And a family stronger than it had ever been before. Sometimes, life doesn't give us the ending we expected. It gives us the ending we needed.